Hello, BookTube. Those of you with long memories, it's been a while since I proposed this sort of series or to read newer published books. And a subscriber suggested I should call it Will Shawn Like It? So finally, here is the first, or book one, I'll call it, book one of Will Shawn Like It? And this book was published earlier this year, I believe. Yeah, in 2022. It was earlier this year. And it's River of Gods, Genius, Courage, and Betrayal in the Search for the Source of the Nile by Candice Millard. Uh, and it's exactly what the title says to a certain extent. But yeah, so this was, and it was purchased for me by a kind subscriber, so I could do this. And yeah, so I thought I'd just talk about it. And well, did I like it? Well, we'll have to wait and see. It is a history of not so much the total search for the Nile. There's a brief bit of this. It's mostly to do with uh, Richard Burton and John Hanning speak, and with a minor role in here, and which it was sort of a bit false advertising on the flap. It made it sound like there was going to be a lot about the City Mubarak Bombay, who was a liberated, well, he sort of liberated himself, slave. And he was taken as a child from Africa to India, and he was enslaved for 20 years. And when his owner died, he came back to Africa. He wanted to go back to the continent of his birth. And he got hired by um, Burton to when they were going into the Central Africa to search for the source of the Nile. And he was Burton was very taken with him. He was a very trustful character. Um, but anyway, it's the way it talks about on the flap and everything, that this is, going to talk a whole bunch about him. Well, it did a little bit, but not as much as it sort of it said. So, which that was a bit disappointing. It'd be nice to have a really big biography of him, because I think there's enough known, especially after he became an explorer. We'll get to that in a bit, but as I say, it's mostly about Richard Burton, who was born in 1821. He died. I have to look at the dates here to remember. Born in 1821 and died in 1890. He was an interesting character. I really I've always been interested in Richard Francis Burton. Um, and he could learn languages in literally months. He probably knew like 20 some, he knew dozens of languages. He was very proficient in it. He went to Oxford, but he sort of he engineered his expulsion from Oxford, and he went into the army, and he was in the army in India. But he got leave. His first, like the book opens with him going to Mecca, and he was the first European non-Muslim to get into Mecca, and right to inside the Cabal as well. And he disguised himself as Muslim, but he prepared for this for a long, long time, but he still didn't have it down to perfection. So it was touchy in places whether he would be found out and actually killed. But he succeeded in that, and he wrote a book about it. His pilgrimage to Mecca. And then he wanted to explore to try to find the source of the Nile, and he um, he wanted the first sort of foray into it, which he wrote about in First Footsteps in Africa, and he hired, and as his sort of second in command was John Hanning Speke, and they attempted to go into, like, they were in it was a bad area, but anyway, they were attacked at night by like over 300 um, attackers, and they one of his friends was killed. Burton's friends was killed, and well, many, I think, of the others that were trying to defend. But Burton got a spear right through his face, and it split his top palate, and knocked out teeth, and it almost killed him, obviously. But he always had this long scar that sort of ran the whole line of his cheek for the rest of his life. Speke was tortured to a certain extent. He had spears sort of stuck through his shoulder, his side, and his legs, but he did survive. He was younger than Burton, but that sort of episode sowed the seeds of a lot of discontent between them, mostly on Speke's part, because there was one incident that when they were being attacked, Burton said to because I think Speke was backing up to get some ammunition or something, or do something. Anyway, he was backing up, and Burton said, "Don't back up. They'll think you are afraid and running away." But you see, Speke took that the wrong way, and he harbored this for the rest of his life, literally. And because he wrote about this, that he thought that Speke thought he was a coward, at that point. But that, I don't think that was the situation. But anyway, they survived this, and then they went back, and they went to Lake Tanganyika with lots and lots of hardships, and Burton almost dying, being paralyzed, both of them being almost blind for long periods. They couldn't actually circumnavigate Lake Tanganyika. And then they heard of another lake that was to the north, Nyanza, and but Burton was too ill to go, so they finally, Speke finally talked him into letting him go, and he found this big expanse of water that he said was the source of the Nile, without any sort of real proof of it at all. So they got back to, Speke went back to England first, because Burton was sort of recovering in Zanzibar. And then went to Aden, actually, because he didn't like Zanzibar so much. But anyway, he recovered. But by the time he got back to England, Speke had already said that he was the discoverer of the Nile, and the rift between them started getting bigger, and it culminated into Speke going back with an expedition to the which he called Lake Victoria, but he still never sort of got actual proof that it was. He didn't get all the information. The information needed to be absolutely 100%, with astronomical readings, that it was the source of the Nile. But he still claimed it was, and Burton still questioned that, it still may not be. So they were going to send, well, they sent somebody else. They sent Livingston, who David Livingston, who eventually died on that expedition, to do this. But Speke had died as well. Speke was born in 1827. He died in 1864. But during this time, they, like I say, the Sidi Mubarak Bombay was with them, and he lived from 1820 to 1885. Speke died young because chances, it looks like that he committed suicide when there was going to be a big debate in Bath between Speke and Burton, for, to say that, whether or not the Lake Victoria is the source of the Nile or not. But the royal, when I say they, this the Royal Geographical Society sent David Livingston, but he was already in his 50s. He was past his prime for this kind of exploration, and he expired there. Um, but who actually found the source of the Nile and found Livingston was Henry Morton Stanley, and at the same time, the city Bombay went with Stanley. He didn't like Stanley so much. Stanley, the other explorers sort of tried to go through peacefully. Let's put it that way. And Henry Morton Stanley used force, guns. But he did prove that the Lake Victoria was sort of the source, and then it wasn't actually until probably until the early 21st century that they sort of fully found out the full sort of watershed that feeds into Lake Victoria and then to the Nile. Um, but yeah, so this is the story that she tells in this story. Candice Millard tells in this story, in this book. Sorry, and it's a very it's general. It's a very general um, outline. It's a good start for people for this kind of thing. For not so much a general of the whole history of the search for the source of the Nile, but for a Speke and Burton's and with Bombay helping out. And well, he did more than just help out. I'll get to him in a little bit, but she writes it extremely well. I do like the way she writes, because a lot of other writers have always either taken Burton's side or Speke's side, usually Burton's side, and said that that Speke did this and that, and but she does it a slightly different way. She uses quotations from letters, diaries, everything else, and she allows you to make the decision of what is the um, what the situation is, who was sort of in fault in a sense, who was batshit crazy at times. In other words, uh, she doesn't. She just allows. She shows the quotes. So obviously these are cherry picked, but they are accurate quotes. And she's got a pretty good bibliography, and she did look at primary sources as well. She even went to places. She went to East Africa. She went to the museum where in um, along the shore of Lake Tanganyika, where there's a David Livingstone Museum, and she went to see the places where they went on their exploration. She also was at England here and went to archives, and she saw um, I can't remember the name of the farm or somewhere, the estate, but it was outside of Bath where Speak probably shot himself climbing over a small stone wall, and that stone wall is still there. And the current sort of owner descendant of the cousin, I think, of Speak, gave her a piece of stone. Gave the author a stone from the wall, or a part of a stone from the wall. Um, and she took 5 years, by sounds of it, to research and write the book. So it's a very good introduction to the subject. I would say I've read some of the original material, like exploration of the Lake District in Central Africa. I think it's called by Burton. I've read Speak's accounts, and I've read other ones as well. Um, and But as I say, this was in the flap here, and it talks about that somebody else was important for this, and was the City Mubarak Bombay, which he definitely was, but there's not much about him in here, not much about him at all. He went on to, he probably was the biggest explorer of Africa that there ever was. He walked, back and forth across Africa, with other explorers, with Stanley, and just a number of others that did a lot of exploration there. Um, but it's not to do with these other things. That's why it's a bit false advertising, in a sense. The publishers, I think, have done this to try to cash in on the current thing of, oh, we people of the past have left out people, and haven't done this, which is true, but do it in a way that it actually does give you a lot more. There's nothing more in here than there is in other books. Sometimes he is excised from a lot of things, as a lot of them are, but she has an interesting chapter at the end where she talks about that the Royal Geographical Society, for in the explorer world of the time, they actually uh, they actually recognize the importance of indigenous people in their exploration of the world, not just in Africa, everywhere that they went. And like City Mubarak, Bombay was honored with a medal. Eventually, he never got to England, but they also honored. Um, um, it's Chuma and Susie. I can't remember their first names. That they had the anglicized first names. That actually were David Livingstone's sort of companions, and that prepared and carried his body back to England, and they were recognized, and within the circle of explorers they were recognized, but to the wider world, the media and other writers and stuff never recognized, or rarely recognized, these people, um, if they weren't, because they weren't white. And I think that's one of the reasons why. But it's not just that, because Burton had problems but that was the biggest thing with for them. But if they definitely were not of the establishment, and neither was Burton. So therefore, Burton was frozen out of a lot of things throughout his life, because he did not have the connection. He did not have he balked against the sort of the kind of milieu that was around that, with privilege and everything like that. So, but he still had some, but a lot more than people like Chuma and Sousa and Bombay. But they're all sort of by degrees within the same package, that they did not have the correct handshakes. They did not have all these things, and they weren't viewed as the as important, especially the indigenous explorers and the indigenous people who would give them information, because these lakes, these places were not unknown, but they were known to locals, and it was Europeans that discovered them. Well, they didn't really discover them; they just brought the information back to Europe. But anyway, that's a whole different argument for thing. But she does address this at the epilogue, I think, and she does it kind of interesting because, as I say, it's an interesting dichotomy here, that within the explorer community and people at the time, they did recognize, or for the most part recognized, the importance of indigenous peoples for their quest and what they did. But the wider public never did, because it never got out. They never promoted it either. That's the other thing. But yeah, no, it's an interesting dichotomy, because but it is something that is kind of being rectified today, which is good, because there's a lot of information that is in the letters and the notes and the diaries of these explorers about the indigenous people, which usually was excised from the published the published work. But it's still there in the archives, in the letters, and that's where people like Candice Millard and others are now digging into it, to bring this to light, which is great. But again, as I say, this is a introductory book, I would say, and a very good introductory book to the subject for this. So there's a couple other things I wanted to say, because there's some good quotes that I think, because there's Isabel Arundel, who became Isabel Burton, who married Burton. She lived from 1831 to 1896. She was 10 years younger than Burton. But she's like, there's a fabulous quote that she wrote in her diary. "I wish I were a woman. If I were, I would be Richard Burton." And then she goes on to say something like, "But I am a woman, so therefore I will marry Richard Burton." And she did. And she brings up also a quote, which I always liked, from Charles Algernon Swinburne, the poet. They were friends through the Cannibal Club that Burton started after his explorer days were over. But it said, Burton had the jaw of the devil, of a devil, or the devil, or a devil, jaw of a devil, and the brow of a god. And he, and it clearly in here, Burton comes out, on top of Speak for sure, but he still, respected Speak to a certain extent, but Speak seemed to, anyway. You could do a psychological profile on these two, that's for sure. But yeah, so did I like it? Yes, I did. So Shawn liked the first book of this reading. The next one is Empire the Vampire, which was purchased for me. That's a longer book. It's about 500 or 500 and some pages, I think. Which I'm not sure when I'll get to it, but that'll be the next one. That'll be book 2 of Will Shawn Like It? Anyway, that's enough of this rambling on about 24 minutes. So if you've read the book, do let me know. And would you like to see more of me reading more newer published books? This was like shooting fish in a barrel, as the saying goes. This was going to be, unless it was very poorly written, it was destined that I was going to like it. But anyway, thank you, BookTube.